then leads me to introducing our keynote speaker. So it gives me great pleasure to invite Dinusha Panditaratne to take the stage. Dinusha is the advisor and the head of Asia Governance and Peace Directorate at the Commonwealth Secretariat. She has a wealth of experience in international law, human rights, regionalism in the Indian Ocean, and Sri Lankan foreign policy. She is new to her role at the Commonwealth Secretariat, having joined just 3 weeks ago. Indeed, she is still living in Colombia, where she's talking from now, but will be based in London from August. Before joining the Secretariat, Dinusha was the Executive Director and Fellow at the Lakshman Kardi Gama Institute of International Relations and Strategic Studies. This is a think tank of the Sri Lankan Foreign Ministry. She's previously taught law in the Chinese University of Hong Kong and also practiced law at Millbank in New York. So over to you, Dinusha.
Thank you, Yasmin, for that wonderful introduction. And before I begin, may I just ask if you can hear me?
Yes, we can hear you loud and clear.
Wonderful, thank you. Well, good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to everyone who is listening in from around the world. It's really an honor to speak at this distinguished and diverse gathering on an important topic. I've been asked to offer my thoughts on 3 dimensions of a more just post-pandemic world. First, on the rule of law. Second, on how COVID-19 is challenging the rule of law. And third, on possible ways to respond to such challenges. So in the next 8 minutes, I'll provide a few brief observations on each of these 3 aspects. They will touch on some priorities of the Commonwealth, an association of 54 member states, which are collectively home to 2.4 billion people. But they will also take the perspective of someone who lives in a middle-income country in Asia, and where many countries share commonalities in their experiences of COVID-19. So let me begin then with the rule of law, a concept that is familiar and yet continues to evolve. The summary version of the paper on defining the rule of law launched today contains a useful contemporary definition of the rule of law. It describes it, and I quote, as a concept according to which laws, institutions, and practices ensure that everyone, including the government, public, and private entities, and citizens, are accountable to laws that are public, fair, equally applied, independently adjudicated, and compliant with international human rights law, with the aim of achieving an orderly and just society and sustainable development. This is an admirably complete and progressive definition, encompassing both the so-called thin and thick aspects of the rule of law. In other words, thin procedural aspects, such as that rules be clear and apply equally to everyone, as well as thicker, more substantive aspects, such as that rules be consistent with human rights, and now also with sustainable development. To many of us, the value of these aspects is self-evident. My only cautionary observation here is that as we scale the concept of the rule of law from thin to thick, and from including human rights to sustainable development, we must keep working to secure widespread acceptance of the rule of law in all its aspects, across all countries, rather than taking acceptance of even the procedural aspects for granted. And I say that because in some quarters, for example, the various requirements of the rule of law, and particularly any version that includes human rights, are viewed as an obstacle to rapid economic growth. This belief is perhaps more prevalent and indeed more understandable in low or middle-income countries where economic growth is so urgently needed, and especially in the wake of COVID-19. We could cite research that shows the economic benefits of the rule of law, but not being an expert in this field. I would simply encourage all of us who advocate for the rule of law to relentlessly promote public and political recognition of the innate and the utilitarian value of the rule of law, especially amongst young people. This is a necessary investment, I believe, to ultimately ensuring the accountability of governments. In terms of the challenges to the rule of law, I've already alluded to one challenge to the rule of law since COVID-19, and that is the urgencies created by the pandemic, particularly in its economic dimension, and also, of course, in the health sector, which sometimes trump arguments about the need to adhere to the rule of law. And this might be seen, for example, in the relaxing of rules around the promulgation of new laws during the pandemic, or in how equally the new laws are applied. In general, there seem to be two broad types of challenges to the rule of law, which Lord Ahmed also spoke about. I mean, first, those that already existed, but have since deepened after the onset of the pandemic. And second, new challenges that have emerged since COVID-19. The challenges of the first type include the prevalence of corruption in some countries, which has led to more opportunities to misuse funds, and particularly those funds earmarked for dealing with the pandemic, and to poorer health outcomes. And a recent study by Transparency International compiled cross-country evidence of corruption at the point of delivery of healthcare services during the pandemic, and noted how it has led to lower provision and quality of such services, especially for women, patients, and providers. New challenges to the rule of law include the introduction of emergency laws, which are defended as necessary to contain the pandemic. But in many instances, these have increased arbitrary powers and obstructed the usual checks and balances of, for instance, a free media, parliamentary oversight, an active civil society, a robust opposition, and periodic elections. Well, how then do we respond to these manifold challenges? The voices assembled today are sure to provide inspiration. And in the limited time I have remaining, I would just mention a couple of observations. The first is that in addition to what we can do individually and collectively to enhance the rule of law in our own countries, there is also the complementary role of multilateral organizations. So the multilateral architecture helps to address challenges and inequalities within member states, but importantly, it helps to address the inequalities between member states. For example, in the ability of low and middle income countries to access new vaccines and digital technologies. And to fully realize that goal of sustainable development that is embedded within that thick concept of the rule of law mentioned earlier, we need to address inequalities both within and between states. Secondly, and finally, we can identify and celebrate what has already been done to uphold the rule of law during COVID-19 as a way of supporting these individuals and organizations, but also of inspiring ourselves. To mention just one of the many causes for celebration, in Uganda, there is an exciting organization called Barefoot Law, which the Commonwealth Secretary General visited earlier this year. Barefoot Law uses technology to disseminate legal information and offers pro bono services to underserved communities through its websites, which deliver simplified legal information. With a monthly reach of over 450,000 people, it is continuing to expand its technological approaches to further its services, including in the development of an AI system that can offer real-time legal advice. So initiatives like these provide avenues for conflict prevention and resolution and offer frameworks for people to learn about their rights and demand accountability. They are powerful, and indeed, if scaled internationally, they can prove revolutionary. And with multiple scale initiatives like these, through innovative organizations around the world, we have good reason to be optimistic that the fullest, thickest version of the rule of law that we can conceptualize is within our reach. And let me end then on that hopeful note. And I would like to do so by thanking Advocates for International Development for this opportunity for reflection and inspiration, and wishing you all a successful conference of sharing, learning, and new solutions. Thank you.
Thank you, Dinusha. You've certainly set a really high standard and many of the issues that you and Lord Ahmed have raised will help develop our thinking. Thank you for sharing your experiences and your perceptions of the situation we face and how indeed that we can respond. We wish you all the very best in your new role, and we look forward to continuing our work with you. Thank you again. We could not have wished for a more energizing start.